communities. We do try to keep, City Watch, on the air. And so the second half of our show today, we're going to be talking about the Killer Coke. The premium for this half hour, though of course you can still do the Whistleblower DVD, is the Coca-Cola Case DVD. Directors, Herman Gutierrez and Carmen Garcia present a searing indictment of the Coca-Cola empire and its alleged kidnapping, torture, and murder of union leaders trying to improve working conditions in Colombia, Guatemala, and Turkey. The filmmakers follow labor rights lawyers Daniel Kovalik and Terry Collinsworth and Ray Rogers, director of the campaign to stop Killer Coke, as they attempt to hold the giant United States multinational beverage company accountable in this legal and human rights debacle. And so we're joined now by Ray Rogers, and Ray has directed the campaign to stop Killer Coke since it was launched in 2003. He's a labor rights activist, labor union strategist, and organizer. Is credited with pioneering the strategy of the corporate campaign, a tactic that has been used by labor unions, human rights advocates, and environmental activist groups in their battles against corporations in the United States and all over the world. So, Ray, last time I believe we had you on the air, you were on your way down to the annual stockholder Coca-Cola meeting in Atlanta. Were you received by open arms by Coca-Cola at their stockholders meeting?
No, I wasn't. But I wasn't. But I must say that the CEO did come up to me and said, I think we ought to sit down and have a meal together if we're going to settle our differences. So I made it clear that I would be happy to do that. And I suggested when I got up and raised issues on the floor that he invite Warren Buffett, who was also there, who's the largest shareholder in Coke with 9%. I then got a call on May 6th by the head of investor relations saying that the CEO, Muhtar Kent, was very serious, wanted to fly up to New York to meet me to have that meal. I am still waiting for him to come. So, but I think today what's important is I want to talk about how Coca-Cola is not only a major perpetrator of injustice, globally, but right here in New York City. I mean, this company is seeking to be rewarded with an exclusive pouring rights contract covering all CUNY campuses and facilities. Well, what will this mean? Well, this will mean thousands of bright red Coke machines, ads, and displays enveloping CUNY, and a market monopoly for Coke and inflated prices on all beverages and purchases for students, faculty, and staff. I might also add, Mark, that this will mean probably between $1 to $200 million in revenues for the Coca-Cola company by securing such a contract. And yet here in New York City, we have very serious issues and lawsuits of racial discrimination regarding blacks and Latinos who work at Coca-Cola plants and warehouses in Queens and Westchester County, out in the island, and in New Jersey.
Who actually controls CUNY? Who can make this decision? Is this something controlled by the mayor, by the governor?
Well, I'll tell you, we wrote to the chancellor and to the board of trustees raising issues about how could they allow Coca-Cola to even be involved in the bidding for this pouring rights contract for all of CUNY when they have a set of guidelines. In fact, we wrote to CUNY and to the procurement office after we wrote to the chancellor and the board of trustees. And we said, and she wrote us back kind of a form letter in which she stated that all companies or proposers are required to demonstrate compliance with the minimum qualifications set forth in the request for proposals, which include the enforcement of fair labor practices in the United States and abroad with respect to its employees and those of its bottlers, distributors, and other contractors. So what I did was myself and some of the workers who had been racially discriminated against and fired, we sent her back a letter and asked her who was in charge of investigating whether the Coca-Cola company met those standards. When could we expect to have them visit our office? When could we expect them to meet with human rights and civil rights attorneys about the horrible things that Coke is doing not only in New York but worldwide? And so far I haven't gotten a response to that, and we're preparing to really do an all-out campaign. And I might say that the Professional Staff Congress at CUNY, the union that represents faculty and staff, is certainly solidly behind our effort.
Now, I should disclose that my son, when he was in college, was active in the Stop Killer Coke movement. But when he graduated from high school, we took a little trip together down through basically Costa Rica and Nicaragua. And you think that Coca-Cola is dominant in the United States. You get down into Central America, and they're everywhere. Everything's named after them. It's the only thing that's really sold in many places. This campaign has been running since 2003, and I remember early on cases where literally union organizers in some of these countries like Colombia were being dragged out and killed. Has that type of brutal oppression of organizers has that been mitigated since this campaign has started, or is Coke still engaged in some of those type of activities?
Well, let's say we've certainly been a watchdog and have been facing a number of lawsuits. That's been very helpful in terms of mitigating some of this. But we had another murder of a Coke union leader in Colombia in 2012. We also have two of the union leaders down there now, where the company is in essence trying to imprison two of the union leaders on false charges of planting a bomb back in I think it was 1998 in a plant down there. I mean, again, the difficulties that the workers face down there and the union leaders, it's still a life and death matter. Very serious situation. There is an outstanding lawsuit right now with respect to Guatemala for the murder, attempted murder, and gang rape of a teenage daughter of union leaders to prevent them from their union activities. This deals with Guatemala. Of course, we have the situation in Colombia where we've now had 9 union leaders, from the Coca-Cola plants down there that have been murdered.
Now, I remember one of our prior shows where the Stop Killer Coke campaign was on. You did have some of the workers on, talking about this racial discrimination case. What that's here in New York? What facility and what's the status of the case? And what are some of the problems that the workers have been experiencing?
Well, first of all, let me say that Coke has a long, sordid history of racial discrimination. In fact, the night before Martin Luther King was assassinated, he called on people to boycott Coke because of the way that they treat their workers. Then in 2000, Coca-Cola paid the largest racial discrimination settlement in the history of the United States, $192.5 million. What's happening here in the plants, the lawsuits, first of all, there was an article which described the lawsuits in the Daily News last year. And the article talked about cesspools of racial discrimination here in New York. And what you've got, I think the best way to give an idea of what some of these workers are up against is to talk about a few of the workers here, a few of the people that live right here in New York City. One is Yvette Butler. In retaliation for speaking up, she was unjustly fired from her job. As a result, she lost her home and with 3 children had to move into a city homeless shelter for 13 months. And in your Butler, and in her own words, she said that she endured racial comments and harassment on the job, as well as unfair and dangerous work assignments. Yvette still suffers from depression and anxiety from the mistreatment at the hands of supervisors, managers, and co-workers. And guess what, Mark? Yvette Butler is a graduate of CUNY. All right? Now, let me give you another example. She's a Brooklyn resident. We have Queens resident Sandra Walker. She was suspended but found innocent of charges that she told a supervisor, quote, "You're a dead man." After witnesses proved she told the supervisor, "You're a racist." Yet Sandra was never reimbursed for 5 weeks lost pay. In her own words, this is what Sandra has to say: "I complained about recurring abuses. This led to me being interrogated by persons from Coke's Human Resources Department in Atlanta. I was asked such irrational questions as, quote, 'Sandra, do you have any personal friends who are HIV positive?' Then I was terminated." Let's talk a minute about Oral Forbes. Oral Forbes, who's also a Queens resident. Oral Forbes worked for Coca-Cola for 10 years as a forklift operator. During those 10 years, he had no disciplinary problems at all. In fact, he had received a number of commendations for his work performances. As a coworker constantly heard racial slurs at him and attacked him. Fellow workers had to break up the fight. The attacker had family members in influential positions in the country, in the company, in the Coca-Cola company. The attacker was blamed for the altercation and sent to anger management. Oral Forbes, however, was terminated. Now, due to the loss of his job, as Laurel told his story, I lost my home, my car, and everything, and had to move my family to my in-laws. He had 2 children. I was unfairly treated and dismissed against. I still am depressed and have lots of nightmares because of what Coke did to me, which is really, really an injustice. These are just some of the personal stories. And if you go to killercoke.org and stopcokediscrimination.org and facebook.com/thecoke16, you can read about these cases. Now, on stopcokediscrimination.org, we have profiles of not only the 3 people I just mentioned, all who were fired by Coke for racial discrimination, but also many of the other workers that have been involved in similar circumstances at Coke.
Now, you listen to City Watch and WBAI. This is the fun part of the fund drive. Give to WBAI.org, 516-620-3602. Operators are standing by so we can keep the doors open. We need to raise $1 million. We need your contribution. Now, today, for a contribution of a mere $100, we'll send people a gift of the Coca-Cola Case DVD, which I understand, Ray, you're involved with. Can you maybe give us a little bit? What was the Coca-Cola Case DVD about?
Well, the Coca-Cola Case DVD is about the systematic intimidation, torture, kidnapping, and murder of union leaders in Colombia and Guatemala because of their union activities. And when we talk about the violence directed at union leaders, it's also directed at family members. There have been a number of family members that have also been murdered and faced the same terrible violence that the union leaders themselves have faced. And this is all because, again, of their union activities. The lawsuits that were directed against the Colombian situation describe how the Coca-Cola Company management worked closely with the paramilitary death squads in Colombia, and in order to pressure, union activists to stop their union activity. There's a long history of this, well documented in Guatemala in the 70s and 80s, where a dozen union leaders were assassinated and 4 had disappeared. It's well known. I mean, it's well documented about Coke's complicity in that. And I think it's well documented about how Coca-Cola managers in Colombia collaborated with and socialized with the paramilitary paramilitary death squad people. Give an example, a situation when the paramilitaries murdered a union leader, Isidro Hill. They murdered him just inside the plant, assassinated him. The next day, they marched into the plant, heavily armed paramilitaries, and rounded up all the workers and told them that if they didn't resign by 4 p.m. that day, they would meet the same fate as union leader Gill. They all signed resignation forms prepared by Coca-Cola management inside the plant. And the next day, the union office was set on fire as well. These are kind of things. Let me tell you, the union leaders. My history is working with union leaders, for years, and I've met many courageous union leaders. But I'm going to tell you something. I have never met more courageous union leaders or smarter people than the people that I've worked with in Colombia and Guatemala. These people have a target on their back, and it's just amazing what they're up against, and they need people's help. And I know it sounds it's hard when you talk about an American icon, Coca-Cola, but this is true. They're not an American icon. They are an American criminal, and they take their criminal activity worldwide, and some of the worst of the activity is directed in the Latin American countries.
Now, you mentioned earlier on the show that CUNY is thinking about doing, a sole source contract, with Coca-Cola, and you're trying to convince the chancellor and the board of trustees not to do that. Has the board of trustees reached out to you and say, hey, maybe could you come and screen this DVD for us at our next meeting so we're more educated about what Coke is doing?
No, as a matter of fact, in response to the very detailed letters that we sent to, at the time, Chancellor Goldstein and the Board of Trustees, and we made sure they were hand-delivered to every member of the Board of Trustees, we really got a form letter from the procurement office. And, of course, that opens up the door for us now to challenge the university. In fact, if there are any publicly minded lawyers out there, we would love to, if necessary, file a lawsuit against CUNY or an injunction from preventing them from allowing Coca-Cola to get such a contract, because they're certainly not living up to the rules and regulations. I mean, if CUNY would allow Coke to do this, they're violating their own rules and regulations. And again, look at CUNY. More than half of the 540,000 students at CUNY are black and Latino. And here we've got this racial discrimination sitting right here in our own backyard. And this is serious stuff. This is not just people being shunned or had a comment made against them. These are people that were under great stress and fired, lost their jobs, and put their families in serious predicament. This is the Coca-Cola company. This is what this company is about. Okay? This is not about the sweet polar bears you see in their advertising. This is a mean, brutal, vicious company. I've been investigating this company for 10 years, and I'm talking to somebody who never had a bad word. I didn't drink soda, but I never had a bad word about Coke. I would think of them as the polar bear ads. But believe me, I know what I'm talking about. And if you go to my websites, stopcokediscrimination.org and killercoke.org, if what we're saying there and what I say in the film is not accurate, they could sue me into oblivion. And what I've said is, Coca-Cola, go ahead and sue me, because truth is a strong defense.
Now, what can the government do about some of this? Is there no leverage that, say, the Obama administration could take against Coke to, certainly here in the United States with its activities, including the racial discrimination, but its pretty brutal oppression of union organizers, especially abroad? Nothing the Obama administration could do, or have they taken steps?
Well, unfortunately, the Obama administration would probably be more in support of what the corporations do, just like you had a great guest, Kevin, from the Green Party, Green from the cabinet. I'm also on the cabinet, I'm glad to say. But,
that's a coincidence. I've forgotten about that.
When Bradley Manning situation, look, Bradley Manning to me is a hero. Okay, and these workers that work at Coca-Cola under these horrible conditions and stand up to fight for the rights, they're all heroes and heroines. And again, it's unfortunately, Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Well, all I can say to people here in New York City, there'll be a lot of injustice spread throughout New York City if the Coca-Cola company secures an exclusive pouring rights contract for all CUNY campuses and facilities. This would be such an injustice, and believe me, the only way we're going to prevent this is to be able to mobilize, students and people within the city, and continue to get the support of the faculty and staff at CUNY not to let this happen.
Okay. Well, Ray, I want to thank you for joining today. I got to start pitching like the Dickens here.
Well, let's raise $1 million for WBAI, because I know people like myself, we don't get a lot of opportunities. I can tell you right now, the New York Times, when you look at the way they're tied into the Coca-Cola company and Coca-Cola Latin America, they're certainly not going to do an interview, and a lot of programs won't, but you can count on WBAI. And like I say, I certainly support raising $1 million. In fact, let's raise $2 million.
Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you, Mark.